Commercial Papers by Savannah Hires. What are commercial papers? Commercial paper is a term widely used to describe legally binding and commercially acceptable documents. They're also referred to as negotiable instruments. Negotiable instrument is an unconditional written promise to pay, or pay to the order of another party, a certain sum of money on demand or at a definite time. Examples of these would be contracts or checks. What are the characteristics of a commercial paper? Well, there's presumption of consideration, and there's negotiability versus assignability. What kinds of commercial paper are there? There's the promise to pay and the orders to pay. Promissory notes would be an example of promises to pay. A promissory note is a written note letter in which one person promises to pay a certain amount of money to another at a definite time. Orders to pay would be like checks or drafts, a bill of exchange, pay to the order of. The meaning of paid to the order of gives commercial documents negotiability. This gives the party the ability to transfer it freely from one person to another, and it can be accepted as readily as cash. Parties of commercial papers. For promissory notes, you have the maker, the co-maker, but it's not necessary to have a co-maker, the payee. For checks or drafts, you have the drawer, the payee, the drawee, which is usually a bank if it's a check, and the holder. The holder is whoever possesses the check, whoever presents it for cash. A negotiable paper. They must be written and signed by the maker or the drawer. They must contain an unconditional promise or order to pay a definite sum of money. They must be payable on demand or at a definite time. They must be payable to order, to bearer, or to cash. And they must name or indicate the drawee with responsible certainty. Let's talk about checks. Checks serve as a receipt when you pay or cancel by the bank. The bank must honor the check when it is properly drawn against the money the drawer has on deposit. Checks are always payable on demand. However, there are certain things that make them invalid, such as the date on which the check is issued or presented. A check is normally given 30 days, but after 6 months is considered stale dated, or a stale check, and the banks will no longer honor it. Check 21 is the term commonly used in reference to the check clearing for the 21st Century Act. Check clearing has advanced a lot in the past few years. Types of checks. There's different types of checks. You have certified checks, cashier's checks, teller's checks, bank checks, official checks. They're all the same thing. Traveler's checks, which are going out of date, going out of style, I should say. Money orders, Then you have your bad checks. This is when there isn't enough money to cover the check in the bank. So, it's not good. It's a bad check. It's not readily available for cash. You have forged checks, which is where there's a signature on the check that doesn't match the signature on file at the bank. You have raised checks, where the amount has been changed and raised by the payee. There's post-dated checks. A post-dated check is a check dated later than the date you wrote it. So if I wrote it today, but I wrote next week's date on it, that would be a post-dated check. Banks do not honor that. If the person doesn't have the money in their account and they gave you a check with next week's date on it so that hopefully they can get the money in the bank, they shouldn't have gave you the check. They should have waited and gave you the check next week. Stop payments on checks. There's many reasons why you may possibly want to place a stop payment, such as the check's getting stolen, lost in the mail, or if there's been a death. Stop payments are placed by the depositor at his or her bank, and most banks do charge a fee. Endorsing commercial papers. Endorsing commercial papers is when the person that's holding the check signs his or her name. It can be with words or without words. If you can't write your name, you can write an X on the back. If commercial papers are not properly endorsed, a bank doesn't have to honor it. There's different types of endorsements. There's blank endorsements, special endorsement, restrictive endorsements, qualified endorsements, defenses against commercial papers. There's personal defenses and real defenses. Personal defenses would be like lack of consideration, fraud. Real defenses would be forgery or discharge due to bankruptcy. Presentment and dishonor. Presentment of commercial papers is when the holder of a note tenders it to the maker and demands payment. Dishonor of commercial papers is when a negotiable instrument is not accepted when it's presented for acceptance. It's not paid when presented for payment at maturity, and things like that.